Welcome, guys, to another episode of the Christian Buddy Show. I am now with Nick Schildberger, the owner of Soundcartel. How are you feeling today, Nick?
I am doing great. How are you?
Not too bad. And I guess I'll just jump straight into the conversation. Do you mind giving the audience a bit of a brief about what you're doing at the moment?
Right now, we are really busy. Audio has had a pretty big explosion in the last 6 to 12 months. It's been proven to be pandemic proof, and so we're actually signing up new projects faster than we can keep up with them at the moment, which is really exciting and really diverse stuff too. We're doing our foundation has been business audio, but we've picked up stuff in the medical space recently, some more business stuff. There's some big tender documents floating around that we've been having a shot at. So yeah, and a really exciting music podcast that with a client in Sweden. So we've had New Zealand, Sweden, Western Australia, and we're based here in Melbourne. So it just sort of proves that you can do it from anywhere, which is really fun.
And just to give the audience a bit of context, so you're the owner of Soundcartel. So what exactly does Soundcartel do?
So I guess most relevant to this discussion is we're a podcast agency. I guess is one part of what we do. Broader than that, we have produced audio for more than 3 decades. So well before the word podcast even existed. We were founded back in the mid '80s by my father, Michael Schildberger, who was a former TV personality. He was a host of and executive producer of A Current Affair on Channel 9. And then in the 80s hosted the breakfast show on ABC Radio. So at the same time, he started this business to provide good quality business information via audio cassette, believe it or not, back in the day, to small business owners looking for advice on how to run their business. And we still produce that content today under the name Business Essentials. It's now a daily podcast, which keeps us very busy. So that's sort of one side of the business, is producing that content that we've always produced. But then, being I guess what we refer to ourselves as a full service audio agency now. And what does that really mean? I guess we produce bespoke audio for anything from Australia's biggest brands, associations, not-for-profits, a bit of work with government, right down to thought leaders who are trying to get their message across in audio. So some of it ends up in podcasts, but not all of it. Some of it's internal communication or private streams within organizations or within franchise groups, that sort of thing. So yeah, really anything in audio where we're telling stories and communicating, that's our kit.
Fantastic. So I think I've got the right person to speak to because the topic of today's talk is what makes a great podcast. So I'm sure you've got some stories and some expertise to tell the listeners. So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I guess the first point is, what about interview style or questioning? I mean, is this something that actually, let's talk about strategy. I mean, I know you mentioned strategy at the start, so I'm kind of switching here, but what does strategy play in podcasts?
Well, for us, it's really important, no matter what we're producing, that for us to make sure that our client has a strong strategy. People come to us and say, we want to produce a podcast. My first question is, why? And if they say, because everyone else has got a podcast, that is not a good reason to produce a podcast. And in many cases, we'll say, no, go do it, but we're not going to help you because that's not a great reason. Quite often they'll come to us with a strong brief and strategy, which makes our job easier. We're on the same page from the start. But I guess it's twofold. It's the business itself or the individual needs to have an idea of where audio fits into the strategy of their marketing more broadly. And bigger brands now actually will have an audio strategy, and that's not just doing a podcast, but it's also things like what's the sound of your business? what music are you using when people are on hold? What is your messaging in TV commercials, in radio commercials? It's it's broader than just that. Does your brand have a sonic brand? Is there something that your customers identify? A few beats of a song, does that suddenly, that's X brand? So that's for the bigger businesses, that's about working out where audio fits in, and then more specifically when you get down to okay, as part of our audio strategy, which fits into your broader marketing strategy. We want to produce a podcast. The first two things, and we do sort of half-day workshops with our clients when we onboard them. The first two critical elements of that strategy for a specific piece of audio or a podcast is, what's the purpose? Why are you doing it? And if that's not clear, again, like I said before, then quit now, because it's not you're not going to achieve your goals if you don't know clearly why you're doing it. And that includes things like what does success look like? What are some of the metrics that you're going to measure at the end of the project to know whether it was worthwhile? And then the second most important thing is the audience, and that's the who. So why are you doing it and who is it for? And really drilling down into like creating an avatar of your ideal listener to your podcast. Because until you know why you're doing it and who it's for, it's impossible to come up with the type of content, the style, the format, the tone, the duration, the cadence at which you're going to produce it, how you're going to market it. All of those things are pretty much impossible if you don't know why you're doing it and who it's for. And that second one, the who, being audience focused, is something that we really concentrate heavily on with our clients as well. A lot of brands, it's all about them. They want to see their name up in lights. But that's not going to produce the best and most entertaining and engaging audio for your audience. And now we all know about the benefits of podcasting. You can have these long form conversations with your audience that you can't have in video. Video completion rates are a minute, 2, maybe 3 minutes max. Whereas audio, you can get people listening to 90+% of a 30-minute podcast, which is a huge opportunity for a brand. But if they stuff it up by making it a 30-minute advertorial, then people are going to switch off straight away. So being audience focused and creating something that is unique and original, that through your research, your audience is going to resonate with your audience. So if you're giving them something, if you're giving them knowledge or education or something practical they can use in their lives, or just straight out entertainment. It might be, a fictional or a comedy podcast. But if you've done the research and that's what they're going to want and they're going to enjoy, and you produce it at the highest quality and all those things that we'll probably talk about a little bit later, then the listeners are going to thank you for that. And that's where the brand gets the benefit, not by running commercials left, right, and center all the way through the audio and talking about the brand. It's got to be about the audience first, and then the benefits will then flow onto the brand from that.
Wow, that's a powerful message. And kind of coming back to that strategy part, do you think podcasts should niche down, or should they? Can somebody be attracted to the host, or what's your opinion on starting a new podcast? Should it be niche down or not?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I'm going to contradict myself, because marketers will tell you wherever you can niche down, the more, the better. So the tighter the niche, and the reason for that is, like what I was just saying, you can really know your audience well, and your topic really well, and it does make it easier to deliver really tight, concise information on a topic to an audience that really want it. So I think that does make a lot of sense, and it does work. So you can basically make a podcast on any little niche topic and you'll find an audience. But having said that, Business Essentials Daily, one of our podcasts, is the polar opposite, because it's general business advice to all small and medium business owners. It's been a point of discussion for us, for more than 3 decades since we launched the concept. And I guess we're going with that concept that, well, lots of businesses need the same information. So everyone needs to know sales tips, customer service tips, leadership tips. And so rather than niche it down and say, okay, we're going to do just business content for X industry with this number of employees, selling these widgets, we've gone broader and sort of said, well, we think we can deliver, and we've proved over 30 plus years that you can deliver broad information and find an audience. But it is probably harder when it comes to the marketing, because you're reaching out to millions of small businesses, which sounds great on the surface. Oh wow, the bigger the audience, the better. Well, it actually makes it more difficult in the marketing to actually have a message that resonates with the niches within your audience. But both can work, and things like you said, having rapport with the host, and the host is one of the most important things in a podcast. Your audience will grow to love the host, hopefully. It's why radio, talkback radio, works so well. People are tuning in for the host.
Yeah.
We're very habitual. We get used to the same voice at the same time every day. And it's quite funny. Someone might host a radio show for years. They go on holiday. The audience goes, "Oh no, I hate that new person." No matter how good they are, your first instinct is, "I don't like change, so it must be bad." And then 2-3 weeks later, the old host comes back and you go, "Oh, hang on, I was quite enjoying the guy that I was just listening to, or the girl that I was just listening to." So I think that's, we're creatures of habit, but that rapport with the host is really important, and that's why we recommend to our clients, don't chop and change the host. Pick someone again from that strategy session, work out who's the most appropriate host, and then stick with them, because that's who the audience are gonna. It's one of the major reasons the audience is going to tune in to each episode.
Wow, cool. Okay. And so is this okay, so do you think there's anything else in the marketing side of things? I know you mentioned that it was difficult. You said that was the most difficult part. And why is marketing such a difficulty?
It's not necessarily a difficulty if you commit the time and effort to do it properly. So we sort of work through, in our strategy sessions, we work through a 9-step process, and the last step is the marketing and amplification. And we sort of fell into a trap, or some of our clients fell into a trap a few years ago, of engaging us to produce the podcast and weren't really interested in using our services for the marketing, because they had internal marketing sorted according to them. So we would go through the production process and produce the pilot series of episodes, and we'd get all the way through to launch, and they would say, any tips on how to market it? It's like, well, we tried to talk about this 3 months ago when we started the production process, and that really is the key. Or there's a couple of keys, but one is start thinking about the marketing from the start.
Yeah.
And marketing comes down to producing the right audio so that it's going to reach the right audience. Because if you're trying to market something that's not right for your audience, well, you're pushing a boulder up a hill. So being unique, doing something different, making sure that you are providing that entertainment and engagement with your audience is really important from a production point of view, to make sure that the marketing will then align with that. And the other thing is to not think that when you get to the marketing that it's the little bit at the end. We say to our clients, marketing should be sort of 50% of the effort from a budget point of view, from a resources point of view, just from a thought process point of view. Think about it from the start. Don't produce your audio and then turn your attention to marketing. And things like, Andrew Davies from the ABC is really strong about the importance of writing really good titles and descriptions that go with your podcast. And that's, I guess, is part of the marketing function. Now, 70+% of people will choose to listen to a podcast based on the title and description. So, calling it episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, huge opportunity loss right there. Those key words in the title and the first line and a half of the description is what might be the thing that someone tunes in for the very first time to your podcast and then becomes an avid listener for ever and ever. So people scrolling through, Andrew refers to it as the thumb test. You're scrolling through what's going to jump out. There's so many podcasts now. So having that listener hook is so important to try and grab people's attention in any way you can. And that's the artwork is really important as well. Really strong, bold artwork. When it's the size of a postage stamp in amongst hundreds of others, you've got to jump off the page. And so little things like not having, a really long, complicated title because too many words get lost on the artwork. Not having a really detailed imagery. Again, when it's shrunk down really small, it gets lost. So being bold and bright, large imagery, simple imagery that's going to stand out, a really strong name, strong titles. And so that's all, people probably think about that as being part of the production process. But if it's not done well, it's going to make your marketing a lot harder.
And what about paid for marketing? You kind of touched on it there. Social media marketing or Facebook ads. Is this something that you're into?
Yeah, we do a little bit for ourselves of our own podcasts. It's not my preferred way to go. If you don't have, we work with brands that are lucky that have, hundreds of thousands of followers across social media and databases and email newsletters. Those owned channels are so powerful and so valuable to those brands that we work with. And it makes the marketing so much easier when you've got a captive audience. Yep. If you don't have that, then yes, we produce audiograms for social media. So combining audio and video into short grabs, and that they work well in grabbing attention. And yeah, you can target your audience quite easily through the likes of Facebook. But yeah, if you haven't got the audience, then I guess, that paid method does give you that exposure.
What do you think is the most effective marketing method? It might be different for everybody, but just a general, what is the general best marketing method in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because everyone's going to have different owned media, owned channels. It's something that Pacific Content in Canada, they refer to it as the superpowers that their brands have. And they do an audit, and quite a detailed audit of what those superpowers are. We produce a podcast for Magellan Asset Management. So they're a big fund manager. You'd think the topics could be pretty dry on the surface. But they're actually receiving 10,000 downloads per monthly episode within the first 30 days, which puts them in the top, 3 to 5% of all podcasts on the planet, which is a pretty decent effort for something that seems a bit dry. What they've done, their superpower is their chief investment officer, Hamish Douglas, is really well connected. And so they have guests of real star power. For example, Michael Morrell, who's the former deputy director of the CIA, CEOs of Starbucks, Nestle. These are top line heavy hitters in the world of business. So that's their superpower. When it comes to marketing their podcast, they've reached out to get PR through the Australian newspaper, the Financial Review, and because of those guests, they get articles written about the interviews they've done. And all those articles are effectively, they're free promotion, minus the effort, to get the press release out there. And all those articles then link back to their podcast. So for them, they've used the star power of their guests to help amplify their message. And they also...
What's the spellings? Sorry, Magellan, was it?
Yes. Magellan. So Magellan, the podcast is called In the Know.
In the Know. All right, I might have to check it out. It sounds you've sold me. It sounds very good.
if you're interested in the investment world and financial markets around the world, then it is really interesting. And Hamish is, as well as being well connected, is just super smart and really interesting to listen to. So, but you've just mentioned something right there, which makes up for 75% of podcast discovery, and that's word of mouth. So, and about half of that is what we're doing right now, talking. And it's a hard thing to market that. I mean, you can't go around one-to-one telling people to listen to a podcast and then, tell your friends. So it's one of those things that does grow organically. And the other half is, through social media and those sorts of things that we've just discussed before. So definitely a channel that works. But to encourage word of mouth, it comes back to the show being unique, high quality, interesting, engaging, and then it can, it will catch fire. It'll get passed around.
Yeah, I hope that happens to my podcast. But okay, that's interesting. And kind of moving on the theme of what makes a great podcast, the equipment. So I know you can record a podcast on your iPhone these days, but yeah, I mean, what's your opinion on just general equipment for a social influencer? What would they need?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. The barrier to entry is super low. You don't need to spend an absolute fortune. I'm sitting here in our in-house studio at Soundcartel talking into an AKG microphone worth about $2,500. That is not necessary as a starting point. It's our business, so of course we have a range of microphones. We have a C24 controller just outside here in the edit suite. But that's starting at the professional level. For an influencer, you can. What microphone are you speaking into there, Christian? Is that a Rode?
That's a pod mic. Yeah, Rode. Yeah, just a pod. Yeah, specifically built for podcasts. So yeah.
Couple of $100, sort of that kind of vicinity. Yeah.
I got it in a deal. I got a mixer as well, 2 mics. So shout out to DJ City, djcity.com. Yep. So
yep, we've bought plenty of stuff through DJ City. So that's perfectly fine for a startup. We always recommend simple. So an external recording device is handy, like a Zoom H6 or H5. They're a few $100. Something that you can record into that's separate to your computer can just sometimes keep things a bit of distance between things. It also means you can plug in XLR cables rather than just USB mics into a computer. For most of our remote, for most of our location recording, we actually just use Shure SM58 microphones, which are a dynamic microphone that every listener right now who has ever watched a singer, their musician's favorite microphone, you can drop them off a cliff and they'll bounce and not break. Being dynamic, they're pretty robust like that. They're good if you're sitting at a table in an office or in someone's bedroom, not in a really well soundproofed space, because you won't pick up as much of the surrounds as a condenser microphone like what I'm speaking into now. But there are a range of in that $200 to $400 range of microphones. There's a heap you can get, and the Rode makes some USB mics that you can plug straight into your laptop. And with remote recording software like we use Riverside, there's Squadcast, there's a few others. It does make it quite simple. And while we're still stuck in COVID times, a lot of our recording is done with guests like we're doing now, not face to face. So you need one microphone plugged into your laptop, and that's your minimum spend. It's not a huge issue. I wouldn't recommend using the speakerphone on your mobile phone and uploading it straight to the podcasting world. It's not how you're going to grow an audience unless the content is like blow your mind amazing. The Australian National University was involved in some research a few years ago that showed as audio quality decreases, credibility decreases as well. So when we're talking to brands, we sort of highlight that it's worth spending the time, having a microphone, pair of headphones, and finding a quiet place to record, because it's going to make such a difference in the quality, which translates directly to credibility. So for brands, that's really important.
Yeah, that's an interesting fact, that the credibility goes down. Yeah, that's
and you could
all right.
you could get away with it 5-10 years ago. there weren't many professional outfits like us out there recording, everything in the studio. But these days, there's so much broadcast quality audio out there. All the big radio stations are podcasting their radio shows. They're all recorded, in studio. So that we're much more accustomed now to that higher quality broadcast style of audio, and stuff that's been recorded on an iPhone in a bathroom ain't going to cut the mustard anymore.
I thought it would be nice in a bathroom. We could have a few sound effects, add some ambience to the podcast if that's your style. But I don't think it would be everybody's cup of tea. So
no. Unless it was, if it was a plumbing podcast and you're working in a bathroom, it might be appropriate. But beyond that, perhaps not. No,
perhaps not. Cool. All right. Is there anything else in that space that we can add, or anything that we've missed in that space?
From a technology point of view?
Yeah.
Probably not. I think beyond the technology is, we just sort of touched on the environment. Really thinking about, because even the best microphone in the wrong setting is not going to give you a great result. So, having a really expensive microphone but recording on next to a busy road, you can't cut out the traffic noise. So we, as part of our remote recording guide, we talk to our clients about having a quiet room, as many soft furnishings as possible. If that means getting into the wardrobe, if you've got a walk-in robe where you're surrounded by clothes and a carpeted floor, sometimes you don't think about that. You sort of think, oh, well, I'll just sit at my kitchen bench because that's where I'm comfortable. But it might be a marble top with high cathedral ceilings and lots of glass windows. That audio is just going to bounce around from surface to surface to surface to surface. So finding somewhere that might be a little bit uncomfortable but is got a lot of soft furnishings and things like, can you switch off the air conditioning or the heating just while you're doing your recording? Can you pull down curtains or blinds over glass surfaces? It might be just put a blanket on a hard table under your laptop if that's, if it's a really hard surface. Small rooms with soft furnishings are going to deaden that noise and stop that reverberance, which is, again...
Sorry, I've noticed you've got the soundproofing in the background there. Is that whole room soundproofed?
Almost, yeah. All four walls have at least some coverage. There's some gaps, but yeah, it's pretty much covered. And the table I'm sitting at has a soft material on it as well. So hopefully the only thing that's bouncing around is me looking into the laptop, and hopefully that's not causing too many reflections.
So talking about soundproofing, are there some ways to, if I don't have that equipment, what would you recommend the easiest way to soundproof something?
These panels are not expensive. You can buy them online relatively cheaply. And if you have a space that you want to set up to be a regular recording space, putting a few of these on the walls around you and in the corners as well to stop the reflection in the corners can help. I know people that put egg cartons onto the walls just to try and absorb some of that sound. We have in our edit suite, just to my right here, we have big thick curtains that we can pull across some of the windows and glassed areas, because it's part of an office space that looks out into where our producers work, so we can sort of pull curtains across there to stop reflections when we need to. What else? Look, I know voiceover artists that have 2 ladders set up, and they put a blanket or a doona over it, and they have the microphone under there. They go in, they do their recording, and then come back out from under the blanket. So it doesn't need to look pretty. It needs to do its job.
Yeah, there's so much production work that goes into making a podcast that you don't really think about once you start. But then, once you get into it and you hear yourself back, and you want to improve little bits and pieces, and yeah, I guess it's just a gradual process of learning and getting better at the craft, and yeah.
And the other thing, you can always hire a studio. I mean, we have our own in-house studio here that people can hire, but there are studios all over the country now, and they're popping up in people's in their homes that they'll rent out to earn a bit of extra pocket money. So yeah, finding a quiet room in someone else's venue can be another way. If you live in a small apartment in a busy area and you have to record from home and it's just not quiet enough, then there are plenty of options to find studios or booths that you can record in. And somewhere you take your own equipment as well. You can just take it in there. It's basically just renting a quiet room, right up to full scale studios that record everything for you through professional microphones and through Pro Tools, and then we'll deliver the audio to you when you're finished.
Where are you located?
We're based in Hawthorne East in Melbourne. So
okay, shout out anyone's listening in Melbourne. There you go. All right. Okay, so we've covered the imagery, we've covered bit of marketing, equipment, and what about post-production? I think you just touched on it there with Pro Tools. Is there anything, can you speak into that? Is there anything?
Yeah, I don't do it myself because I'm not a trained sound engineer. We have 2 full-time edit suites here. So they're kept very busy by everything that's going on. But our head of audio, Peter Letts, actually started with this business back in the late 90s. And he was, at that time, still splicing tape rather than digital editing. So he was here for that transition from analog to digital editing. So has basically grown up and learned everything in the last 20 years on the job here, as well as obviously having continual study as well. And he is, when it's done properly and you watch a trained sound engineer edit audio, it's like they're reading a foreign language. They can just look at the waveform and they can hear it by seeing it. It's phenomenal. And the speed at which he can clip things out and he can change syllables in a word. If someone mispronounces a word, he can take a syllable from somewhere else and slot it in. And we, again, our attention to detail is very high here at Soundcartel and always has been. And Peter leads that from a culture point of view. So we go through a very thorough cleaning process of all audio. So we take out the ums, the ahs, the coughs, tighten things up. It all comes back to respecting the listener, which, where this conversation started about, being audience focused. It's also about respecting the listener. So editing out things that are not necessary is really important. If we record for an hour today, but there's only about 20 minutes of content that's going to be valuable to your audience, then chop out the fluff, chop out the stuff that didn't quite hit the mark, I just said, you can chop that out. And then again.
Yeah, so, I kind of, sorry to cut in there. I usually, my format's a little bit skewed at the moment. I do clip this up and I put the best parts into clips on my Instagram. But for the YouTube and Facebook, it's pretty much free to air. So, I mean, I know there's a danger of going live, and I'm a bit of a dangerous person. I'm a bit of a risk taker. So there's an appeal for me to go live, and sometimes people ask questions as well. So that's a added bonus. But we've got 2 people watching at the moment. But
oh, fantastic! Hello.
Yeah, so it's really cool. I think we're going all right. I think we're going pretty well.
And there's nothing wrong with that live experience. And for YouTube, editing video as well as audio takes it to a whole new level. But if you were going to chop this up and distribute it as a standalone podcast, then my recommendation would be to actually go through and give it a bit of a clean and edit if required. Again, it's just about respecting the listener and placing an importance on their time. So if it's a 20-minute episode, but you can chop it down to 15, then we always recommend do that because, again, your listeners will appreciate that. And it means they can get on to your next episode quicker than be listening to all the back chat. It's also, in content planning, when preparing for an interview in a podcast, having a very clear idea of what you want to discuss, how long you think that's going to take, as the interviewer, keeping an eye on the time to make sure that your episodes are somewhat consistent in their duration. I don't like seeing episodes that, 1 week are 10 minutes and the next week are an hour and 10 minutes. I think it's nice to try and give people an expectation that you're probably going to have, this is going to be maybe a 45-minute chat, and that's fine. And people will come to expect that from you. I think that consistency is important, and consistency in when you release as well. So if it's a podcast that comes out every second Tuesday, then try and stick to that cadence, because people that love your show will be expecting it and waiting for it. And again, you don't want to let them down, and you don't want to give them the opportunity to move on to someone else's podcast and bump yours down the list. So it's try and give them what they want when they want it.
Okay. You touched on the interviewing having a purpose and intent for the podcast. How big of a deal is that? How important is that?
Really important. And do you mean the actual planning of an individual episode versus the overall series? It's sort of two separate things. Okay. So we would have like a purpose for the series, but then each individual episode of a podcast that we produce, we will have like a mini brief, like a mini strategy. So what we call a briefing document, where we will have a pre-chat with the guest about what we're going to talk about. And that might be over the phone or a quick Zoom call. Do research offline if we can about that person, so we know what they're going to talk about, and then document the key messages that we want to get across in that episode. So there might be half a dozen things that we want to speak to John Smith about, and then using those key messages to write, half a dozen to 10 questions that are going to draw out the answers. So the answers to those questions are going to hit those key messages. And the pre-production, so we call that pre-production. If that's done properly, and the time is invested in that part of the process, then the recording part actually becomes the easiest part of the process, because both the interviewer and the guest have both seen the briefing document. They both know what the questions are going to be, what the content is going to be about, what the podcast is trying to achieve. Part of that briefing document, we will also explain to the guest the things that come out of that overarching strategy, which is, who's the podcast for, why are we doing it, who is it for, so that the guest then can tailor their answers to that audience. You may remember before we hit record, I asked you some of those questions about, who is your audience, to know, am I pitching these answers at, huge brands with multi-million-dollar budgets, or am I pitching them at people that at this point think that recording into an iPhone is an acceptable way to make a podcast, and we're trying to, bring them up a little bit, or is it somewhere in the middle? Or is it all of those people? So I'm trying to sort of vary my answers based on that. But so having that pre-production really solid means that when you hit record, you're not wasting the guest time, you're not fluffing around, you get down to it. If you want to get a 20-minute episode, you don't record for 2 hours and try and get the best 20 minutes. If you want 20 minutes, you might record for 25 or 30 minutes max. And that then, if that's done properly, then it makes the post-production as streamlined as possible. The last thing I want is for Pete and Belinda, our two sound engineers, to be given 2.5 hours of raw audio to try and pluck out 10 minutes. And our producers, likewise, to have to listen through hours of content to pull out the best bits is not the most productive way to do that. So get your pre-production and planning done really well. That makes an efficient recording process. If you have an efficient recording process, it's going to make the post-production process as streamlined as possible.
Streamlined. And what about promoting material, promoting something? Is there any, because I'm not sure if people obviously don't really enjoy listening to ads all the time, but if you're kind of putting in a cheeky promotional offer, is there a way to do it? Or what's the best way to do that?
There's a bunch of different ways. I think, this is an interview style podcast. You're the host, and I've talked about the importance of your rapport with the audience. as you build that rapport, your audience will be more forgiving of you putting in sponsor messages or advertising into the podcast. If you can deliver it, it's probably going to be the most, host-read ads generally come out in surveys as the most effective way to get advertising messages across. And I think the reason for that is if we trust you as the host, we like you as the host, then if you deliver the message, then it'll be okay. The last thing a listener wants is for you to insert a radio style commercial where they're just yelling at me, because radio advertising is very different to podcast advertising. Radio is on in the background. Ads are done in banks of several in a row, so they all have to yell louder than the one before. Podcasting, completely different. The majority of people are listening one-on-one, probably with headphones or earbuds in, maybe in their car. So it's that one-to-one medium. Ads are different. Ads are usually delivered, as a solo ad or maybe a couple of ads back to back. So it's more intimate. You can be more gentle in the delivery. So yeah, host read probably going to be the best way. But if you want to monetize your podcast, and you will be inserting ads from external sources, and if you can help them produce them in a way that's going to be the least jarring for your audience, it's going to be the best result for the advertiser, because people are not going to get annoyed and pissed off by the ad. And it's going to be the best result for you, because your audience is not going to get upset and switch off because there's too many ads. But there are other ways, partnerships and cross promotion. There are other ways to sort of bring messages into a podcast without it feeling like a really heavy sell. The last thing you want, as I said earlier, is for a podcast to feel like a 20-minute or 40-minute advertorial from an advertiser. There's no transparency. People see straight through it and are just not gonna put up with it. So you need to grow that trust as a host, and then weave in your messaging as appropriate. Okay.
And aside from reading ads in a podcast, are there any other ways you can think of to monetize a podcast?
Sponsorship. So our Business Essentials Daily podcast, we've sort of got a partnership arrangement with Mazars. They're an accounting firm. Okay. And so they provide not just ads, but they also provide content. So we'll interview some of the partners from Mazars around Australia on topics that are of value to small businesses. And so what that gives them is exposure of their partners to an audience, to our audience. It also means that they can put those episodes out through their own social media, on their own website. So they're effectively getting like a custom produced podcast, but they're not having to go to the expense of, owning the whole thing. So that's so partnerships that go beyond just, insert an ad and move on. We give them what we call an opening billboard. So every day we say this episode is brought to you by Mazars. It's just a gentle message at the start. It's short, it's subtle. I think, again, I believe that listeners will appreciate the shortness of that rather than it being a long message. Right. And it's just, being a daily podcast, you're hearing Mazars over and over again, but just in a short burst. We've had sponsorship and partnership deals with most of the big banks over the last 30 years. And banks are tricky. We talked about brands before that think about themselves first. Well, I think banks can quite often fall into that category, and they want to make it all about them. But we, convince them that, a short, this is brought to you by the Commonwealth Bank or brought to you by the National Australia Bank. You don't need to go into direct sales in a podcast. It's not the place to do it. It's an awareness and branding opportunity. If the content is really good, and we've done this with our Business Essentials audio magazine for years, if the content is good and it's reaching an audience that value that information, they'll appreciate the brand. That it's obvious that they've put money into it. That's why they're getting the mention at the start. They're making it available because of that sponsorship. We had a relationship with a another accounting firm for many, many years, and it came to renewing a contract. This goes back 15 plus years ago. And they said, "Oh, it's the right time for you to be asking us to pony up some sponsorship dollars." And we said, "Why is that?" And they said, "Well, we just won a huge audit contract that we weren't even going to pitch for, but they asked us to tender. And then we won it. And so their first question was, why did you come to us? Why were you so keen for us to be part of this tender process?" And they said, "Well, we've been listening to you on Business Essentials for years." So it was they'd been back of mind for a long time. You don't change banks or change accounting firms, like you change your undies. It's something that you only do as infrequently as possible because it's not a fun process to go through. But at that time when you just get fed up, that's it. I have to change banks. Then what's going to suddenly pop from the subconscious back to front of mind? I've been listening to messages from that company for years.
It's a subtle approach, yes. Subtle.
It's subtle and it's a slow burn, but that's where podcasting can work really well. I often say, if filling the top of your filling the top of your sales funnel, if I can say it correctly, is not a good strategy for a branded podcast. It's just going to annoy people. If it came right back to the very start, if your purpose is to sell more widgets by producing a podcast immediately, like as in, listen to an episode, go buy product, it's probably not going to work. You're probably better to use the podcasting medium to insert ads into other people's podcasts if it's a direct sales approach, more like, a radio ad where there's a direct call to action.
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
So for a brand to produce a podcast with the aim of someone listening to an episode and going straight to their website and making a purchase is probably not going to work. Whereas I know there are car companies at the moment in Australia advertising in some of the podcasts that I listen to. And so they've got no association with the podcast other than they've inserted a 30-second commercial about an end of financial year sale. And so it'd be a similar strategy to advertising on radio, but like I said before, producing the ads slightly differently and ideally getting the host to read them within that podcast. That strategy will work better at getting that direct sales.
Yep.
Producing it yourself and being the brand that owns the podcast. So this podcast is brought to you by X brand. That's a slower burn. It's about awareness, building trust, reaching an audience that you may not already have communication with, because podcasting, more and more people are listening every year. So you're reaching an audience that we know exists, but they might not be your customers already. But telling them on the first, it's like kissing on the first date. You don't want to go in too hard. Saying to people, buy this right now, as the first message in a podcast. Again, it doesn't work. They're going to switch off. Yeah.
That's the concept. Yeah, concept of marketing, the hard sale. Yeah, it's definitely. Yeah, it's like walking down the street and people offering you watches or trying to sell you watches. It just doesn't work psychologically, and it's just not a nice feeling. So
that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've touched on a few things, and do you think we've missed anything, or
Look, I could talk podcasting all day, and I mentioned that we work through sort of a 9-step process in our workshops, and we've probably dived in and out of most of them. I think, in summary, we talked about the importance of the strategy and then being audience focused. High quality, I think, is really important wherever possible. Aim for broadcast quality and work down from there, not the other way around. And make the investment. Yes, the barrier to entry is really, really low, but if you just produce a cheap, low quality podcast, there's 2-point-something million podcasts out there now. You're not going to stand out. You're not going to reach an audience. You're not going to maintain an audience if you don't do it properly. And that does require an investment in time, if nothing else, to do it properly, to do the research, to get your pre-production, production, and post-production all done properly, so you're producing something that is of value to your audience. If you have a fixed budget, if you've only got X dollars to invest, but you want to produce 10 episodes, perhaps think about halving that 10 down to 5, but doing the 5 better. Do them really well and do less, because sometimes less will actually be more. Do those 5 really, really well, leave your audience craving more, rather than doing 10 in a sort of, so-so way and not really getting that deeper level of engagement and not maintaining your audience. You don't want people listening to 1 or 2 episodes and dropping out because you haven't quite got them. You want them to be raving fans of your podcast that are hanging out for the next episode because you've done it well. And then and work really hard at that amplification from the start. Think about it from the start. Think about your superpowers as an individual or an influencer or a brand. Work out what relationships you already have. Who can you draw on to help you get your podcast into the ears of as many people as possible. And if you've done all the things before that to make sure it's engaging and it's a great show, then all that effort spent on amplification will be worth it, because it'll work and people will pass it on and tell their friends and their family about it. But for more on that, we actually just today released an episode of Podcasting Essentials, which is a sort of our version of educating our audience on the benefits of podcasting and how to produce a really good, particularly branded podcast. We spoke to Jeremy Enns about marketing and his philosophies on how to best grow an audience. So that's probably something that I could recommend your audience tune into as well.
Yeah, I might have to get those details after the show. Absolutely. And yeah, I think we might end it there. We've kind of covered a few topics there, and for the audience to go back into. So if you're ever in Hawthorne, so what street was it, sorry, that you're located on?
We're in Cato Street in Hawthorne East, just near the Monash freeway. So for people coming from the city and the airport, we're quite conveniently located, again, for a bit of a sell there. But yeah, very, very happy for our again, can I mention our website? It's just soundcartel.com.au. So great way to get in touch with us, check out some of the work we've done. And yeah, we'd love to have a conversation with anybody looking to make a podcast, or just talk further about the industry.
No worries. I've just put a little bit of soundcartel.com.au down the bottom there. So,
Brilliant.
All right, no worries. Thanks for listening, guys. And please subscribe to my show as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll make sure I share it as well. So that's it. The word of mouth will be in action.
No worries. Well,
I'll tell my 2 friends.
It was great to have you on the show, Nick, and enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thanks. Same to you.